Thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar, which is the hidden costs of workplace misconduct in financial services. Over the next 45 minutes, we're going to look at workplace misconduct from an angle that doesn't always get airtime, which is the financial one. It's easy to think about misconduct purely as a compliance issue, something to box tick and move on from. But today we're going to show you why that framing sells the problem short. Beyond the obvious costs like tribunals and settlements, there's a much bigger hidden cost sitting within absenteeism, attrition, and lost productivity. And crucially, these are costs that you can actually quantify, not just estimate. We're also going to touch on why this conversation is particularly urgent for financial services right now, as there are a couple of significant regulatory changes landing this autumn. As a way of introduction, I'm Ash McDowell. I'm the CFO here at Culture Shift. And my aim today is to walk you through the numbers. We're going to use our ROI calculator and some real financial sector data to break down both the direct and indirect costs of misconduct. I'm also joined today by Christine Bonney, our head of culture transformation. Christine's going to bring in the cultural lens to all this, looking at how a poor speak-up culture directly drives those hidden costs and unpacking the regulatory landscape, giving sort of practical advice and tips into how you might be able to comply with the FCA's new non-financial misconduct rules and the Employment Right Act's all reasonable steps duty. So over the next 45 minutes, Christine is going to kick us off with a section on why this is important now, looking at those regulation changes and some stats around how ready people are feeling and ready for that and why that should matter to you specifically. Then together, we're going to take you through the hidden costs of misconduct, walking through that ROI calculator using real numbers that cover the cost of absenteeism, recruitment, productivity, and the cost of case management. And then at the end, we'll close with a live Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please do drop them into the chat at any point. Don't feel like you need to wait till the end. And we'll come to those at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, let me hand over to Christine to talk about why this is important now.
Thanks, Ash, and hi, everyone. So yeah, I guess the first thing to say is that this is obviously not an issue that's only just become relevant, although as Ash mentioned, there are several important regulatory and legislative changes that make kind of proactively tackling this issue even more pertinent now. But the sector has faced challenges for some time. Things like power imbalances, where an individual's value can often be attached to the amount of revenue that they generate for a business, or the use of NDAs to silence and move victims without repercussions for those responsible for misconduct. A kind of historic lack of diversity, particularly in positions of power, which have led some to kind of refer to the industry as an old boys club. In 2018, the Treasury published a report called Women in Finance on the barriers faced by women in the UK financial services sector, and actually called on firms to review their culture and working practices. 5 years later, to follow up on that, the Treasury launched an inquiry which they titled Sexism in the City, and that found that there'd been a disappointing lack of progress over those 5 years on sexual harassment and bullying, including sexual misconduct. And they also found evidence that, quoting their words, was shocking, especially the extent of misogyny, sexual harassment and bullying, up to and including serious sexual assault and rape. They also spoke about firms' kind of internal whistleblowing procedures being unable to deal with allegations of harassment, and contrasted the stark difference in terms of seriousness of approach between how firms act towards financial misconduct, where an allegation would often lead to immediate suspension, for example, and that taken for non-financial misconduct. So the FCA, in kind of response to this, but also broader criticism on their need to be clearer on how firms should handle non-financial misconduct, as well as a variety of public scandals, actually updated its rules on non-financial misconduct. And the Code of Conduct rule relevant to this comes into force on the 1st of September this year, which is why this is particularly pertinent at this moment in time. And that rule extends the scope of conduct rules in non-banking firms to cover bullying, harassment or violence against colleagues where that relates to an individual's role. Guidance from the FCA also explains how non-financial misconduct is now an important consideration for fit and proper tests, where historically the kind of integrity pillar of those tests focused on financial conduct. Now that's been expanded, and the guidance explicitly states that bullying, sexual harassment and victimisation of whistleblowers are direct breaches of professional integrity. So before the 1st of September, firms are expected to review whether they need to update their approach to staff policies, conduct breach reporting systems, fit and proper assessments, and regulatory references. Also, the Employment Rights Act is very important. We've got an upcoming deadline on the 1st of October for the ERA as well, which stipulates that employers must take now all reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment. And this includes protecting their workforce from third-party harassment from people like clients, customers. Disclosures about sexual harassment are also now protected disclosures, meaning that people who report them can access statutory whistleblowing protection. And NDAs are that have been updated as well. So any kind of clause in an agreement that tries to stop a worker speaking out about harassment or discrimination will be void and legally unenforceable. We at Culture Shift have actually conducted some research around this area, and we've spoken to a number of HR leaders who have kind of reported to us high levels of confidence to meet the requirements of the ERA. But when we then kind of unpicked and spoke to them about practical foundations required to evidence compliance, that's where the picture became a bit more uneven. So, for example, only half of the organisations told us that they have clear reporting processes in place. Fewer said that they share reporting data with the board, and only 38% have conducted comprehensive risk assessments. They also told us about much lower levels of confidence in preparedness to protect against third-party harassment. We also saw that 91% of HR leaders think that their employees feel safe to report misconduct, but only 43% of employees told us that they do. So if you're unfamiliar with what's coming or want support to help you prepare, we can speak to you individually after this webinar and talk about that in more detail. But I will hand back over to Ash now.
Great, thanks, Christine. So as a finance leader in a business, I've sat in lots of board conversations where risk is discussed, and that risk is always tends to focus on impact on bottom line of a profit and loss. Workplace misconduct rarely gets talked about because a lot of those costs are hidden. Everyone knows about sort of like the worst case costs of tribunals and settlements that come when things have sort of gone too far, but we very rarely consider costs that are impacting the workforce when poor behaviours are only just starting, and the impact that has on people. And so we built an ROI calculator to really kind of demonstrate what poor workplace misconduct and behaviours how that might be having an impact on your bottom line. Now, this is an interactive ROI calculator that's available to everyone. If you are interested in sort of like taking a look and applying it to your business, you can find this on our website, which is culture-shift.co.uk. And you can scroll down to the bottom. There is a direct link which we can share as well for anyone that wants to use it. But here at the bottom there is the ROI calculator, and it's really, really simple. You can put in your organisation name, you can put in your email address, which I'll use my personal one for today, the sector that you're working in. So for today we'll have a look at financial and insurance, and then the number of employees within your business. And when you do that, it calculates the ROI based on industry numbers and research that we've found. And it will give you a number based on the potential annual cost before any sort of reputational damage for not acting on poor behavior within your business, and what a 15% improvement of that number could save you annually. These numbers are calculated using various assumptions, including data sources that you can have a look at there and do your own research into. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to click through there. Let me just fire that back up again. There we go. And generally, these are sort of the numbers that we are looking at. So from our research, we've discovered that 15% of employees experience harassment or bullying. Actually, within the financial services sector, our research suggests that up to 45% of people have experienced or witnessed some sort of sexual harassment. So that might be even stronger than what this calculator is currently suggesting. 71% of people take sick leave due to workplace issues. 6% of people leave their job due to harassment that they've suffered, and 5% of affected employees see a reduction in their performance. So, what does that mean? What does that mean from a cost by cost basis? Let's start with sort of HR case management. So this is the cost of investigating bullying and harassment cases. Now, what you'll see as you sort of delve into this is we've made various assumptions based on industry research, but you can change these numbers if actually you know how many cases you had within your business, or certainly the ones that you have been made aware of. You can change this number to whatever your number is within your industry. And we've also calculated a cost of investigating just one HR case. So that cost is the cost of HR speaking to the people who have raised a concern, giving them the support that they need during what is quite a difficult time, speaking to potentially any witnesses to what has happened, speaking to an alleged perpetrator as to what's happened to get a full picture, potentially having to go back and forward between all those people to get the full picture of what's happened and drawing up a report. We estimate that cost about £1,000 per time. And so for a business with 1,000 employees, you might have 40 cases of that within a year, and that cost of just investigating those claims is £45,000. That's a significant chunk of change just spent on understanding issues that needn't have happened in the first place. And that's why that's really important. HR could well be spending their time on more useful, impactful things within your business. So that's 45k of lost time. Christine, do you want to talk through sort of like any practical tips around case management and the cultural angle?
Yes, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, we recently did a survey with various HR leaders, and one of the things we asked people was how much time they're currently spending per week on dealing with workplace conduct issues and or reports. So that's some of the things Ash already mentioned, but like reviewing reports, cases, working with managers and leaders on cases and kind of analysing data, etc. And a third of respondents told us they're spending between 3 to 5 hours per week. 1 in 10 of them told us more than a day a week. So it's a really chunky amount of time. 22% of those we spoke to said they're using entirely manual methods to manage misconduct. So that's things like spreadsheets and Word documents. So there's obviously a big hidden cost in terms of time, administrative burden, and also what might be maybe inconsistent or manual practices can increase that further, but also could cause further issues down the line. We see that most tribunal cases are not actually lost due to the actual decision made by an organisation, but it's rather due to the procedural failures or inconsistencies in approach, poor documentation, etc. So there are clearly risks related to kind of compliance, confidentiality, and not being able to provide a clear audit trail. What we see at Culture Shift amongst our partners is a variety of different models in terms of how speak up culture is created and how processes are managed. So organisations that kind of encourage people to speak up sooner have a variety of both informal and formal routes for people to go down, and often see a higher level of trust in systems. So organisations might have other roles aside from HR, like voluntary trained responders that can kind of support people, signpost them, and help manage reporting systems or reporting software, meaning that it's not all on the shoulders of HR. That in turn can kind of remove a lot of the burden that we've just spoken about from HR and allow HR to focus on more strategic prevention work or managing, formal grievances or more complex cases. One of our NHS Trust partners actually did kind of exactly that. They wanted to use our report and support platform as not just a kind of branch of HR, but actually to have line managers equipped and trained to respond to reports on the platform, and kind of triage and risk assess reports that were coming in, so that they would deal with a lot of the lower risk cases, where higher or more complex cases would be triaged to HR. And they basically kind of fed back to us that it had a massive impact in terms of more reports being made, and that being a positive thing because they're surfacing issues earlier on, and also that burden on HR, who were previously dealing with absolutely everything that was coming in through different channels, was lifted quite a lot. So some of that administrative burden as well that we've described was lifted. But the last point here is that, we wouldn't encourage procedural tightness to come at the expense of a human-centred, empathetic approach. We've heard from individuals who've gone through the process of reporting or even tribunals, that, often the factor that made it worse for them at every stage was a kind of perceived coldness in terms of the organisation or the HR response that they received, or a perception that they were kind of being pushed into a formal process without being given advice on other options that might have been available. So again, a human-centred approach might help kind of avoid issues escalating and enables an organisation to look at individual cases and provide appropriate support earlier on. In terms of just some quick practical tips, of course, we would talk about a tech platform like Report and Support, but it doesn't have to be ours. Any kind of platform that is not manual will enable a more kind of consistent case management approach. It will improve your audit trail, information security, and allow that consistency across both kind of more informal and formal reporting channels. And also just consider who else might have a role to play in the Speak Up system to kind of reduce that burden on HR. Obviously, making sure that managers and others are really trained on how to deal with disclosures or how to manage reports and how to provide support and different resolution options to people.
Thanks, Christine. And it's worth saying that it's one of the reasonable steps to follow for preventing sexual harassment is to have a confidential reporting route. And using a reporting platform is evidence of that. And so when those fines start coming into play on top of your tribunal costs, having a reporting platform in place is one surefire way to show that you are being proactive in your approach. So next, we're going to speak about absenteeism. So I think everyone is kind of aware what absenteeism is. So we have said that 15% of employees experience some level of harassment or bullying within the workplace, and 71% take sick leave due to workplace issues. That's an awful lot of time lost due to avoidable behaviours in your workplace, where people are away from the business and not doing the job that they are paid to do. So our calculator suggests that within the financial and insurance sectors, the current level of absenteeism is 1.4%. that on an average salary for those employees, including additional costs like the cost of any benefits that you might have in place and taxes and things like that, you're talking about an average salary of 83,000. But again, if yours is slightly lower, slightly higher, you can change that number in here to whatever your average number is. And that gives you a total cost of absenteeism for all reasons, not just workplace misconduct, of I mean, that is 1.2 million, which is a huge cost of absenteeism, for 1,000 employees. Now, if you take the assumption that of your absenteeism, if one day is taken sick because of workplace misconduct or an issue that they have suffered from, that is a cost of around about £38,000 a year. We can't get rid of all absenteeism. Sick sick leave is obviously a normal thing, but there are definitely some cases of sick leave that are caused by behaviours within business that perhaps handling it earlier might reduce the level of absenteeism. And therefore save yourself this cost on an annual basis of lost time due to struggling with something that's happened in the workplace. I'll throw that one back over to you, Christine, then to talk about any tips for preventing absenteeism.
Yes, thanks, Ash. So obviously, harmful behaviour can often impact an individual's mental health in terms of stress, etc., and take a toll on physical health. Sometimes people, rather than stay in the workplace and face the situation or the individual or the group that are causing the behaviour, might choose not to turn up to work instead, particularly if they don't actually feel able to speak up or they don't feel like anything will happen as a result of speaking up. And not to keep throwing stats at you, because the benefit of the ROI calculator is they're kind of all in one place, but I thought it'd be helpful to give the national perspective, because the Health and Safety Executive estimate that over 17 million working days are lost each year due to work-related negative behaviours like bullying. So it's obviously a wide-scale issue. And speaking up can often worsen this, because after you speak up, you can often feel exposed, you could potentially be targeted, people experience isolation, rejection from teammates, fear of repercussions. There's also quite a large emotional burden involved in reporting processes and investigations, having to talk about issues that you've faced or potentially traumatic incidents in various different contexts to different people. And we know from our reporting platform, we have an anonymous reporting route, and we ask people the question, why did you choose to report anonymous? And a lot of people, the most common reasons given are that fear of retaliation from those who have carried out the behaviour, or a belief that nothing will be done as a result, or concerns over their impact on their career or other kind of repercussions for them. So those are common reasons for people reporting anonymously, but also common reasons why people choose to never speak up at all, especially if there are no anonymous routes and therefore they have to kind of expose themselves. So of course, like a big tip here, and again, as Ash mentioned, something that I think is part of a lot of the guidance around legislative changes, it's providing that truly anonymous reporting route. And again, we often see examples of reporting systems created that say they're anonymous, but actually there is identifiable information. So it's important to be really clear about that with people and try to actually have a route that protects anonymity. Often we hear clients say, we're worried about attracting anonymous reports or about malicious reports. What do we do with that information? But actually, our partners can find that extremely helpful in terms of tracking patterns and using the information that's coming through anonymous reports to really be proactive in how they target efforts like training or awareness raising campaigns. Fostering a speak up culture and psychological safety is really important to make sure people feel able to voice concerns in different ways, so that is kind of normal, and actually judgment, rejection, that kind of cliqueiness is not the norm. And return to work interviews after someone's been off sick are a great opportunity to create psychological safety and actually find out about issues to make sure somebody's not just going back into work into exactly the same situation, which might cause further absences later down the line. Last point on this one is just about not kind of putting the entire onus on the person who's experiencing something to speak up. So equip the workforce to intervene. There are many things that will happen kind of out of the eyes and ears of people in management, and it's about everybody in the organisation understanding what is acceptable behaviour and what isn't, and how they can safely intervene in different situations. So we teach, for example, the active bystander approach, which has a variety of different techniques that can be used by people. Just one example of how to, again, make this an issue that everybody is looking out for, not just expecting that the individual has to kind of speak up and put their head above the parapet.
Thanks, Christine. And I remember when the initial guidance came out for the Employment Right Act, and it talked about being proactive in preventing sexual harassment, and that kind of feels like a difficult thing to do. But that piece you were talking about anonymous reports and getting trends is a real good way of being preventative, because if you can spot things happening before they even happen potentially, that's a great way of sort of nipping poor behaviors in the bud by understanding sort of the low level behaviors that are starting in your organization early. So it's a really useful thing to be able to do if you want to be truly preventative. The next thing that we're going to talk about is recruitment. Now, you'll notice that we've talked about the hidden costs of workplace misconduct. And you might be thinking that recruitment isn't necessarily a hidden cost. Everyone is painfully aware of how much it costs to recruit new employees. But what people often don't consider is that recruitment cost isn't just around that recruitment fee of finding someone new. Like during a recruitment period, you've got handover time where employees aren't focusing on the task at hand, but focusing on how they can provide an effective handover. You've got time where your new employees is training and ramping up. And so again, lost productivity around the role that they are doing. And so recruitment doesn't just come down to a recruitment fee, but comes down to all the sort of lost time that you potentially have from having to recruit. And that could be senior staff as well, going through that recruitment process, going through interviews when their time could be better spent elsewhere. And if these employees have left not for job opportunities or lifestyle changes, but they've left the business because of harassment or workplace misconduct or something that's gone wrong in the workplace, that's a serious waste of time and energy having to replace those people because of someone misbehaving within your workplace. So in this instance, again, looking at 1,000 employees, if we say 15% of people are affected on an annual basis from some form of misconduct, and 6% of people who experience these behaviours leave the job at an average recruitment cost of £3,000. That's saying you're going to lose around about 9 people per year due to harassment. And again, you can tinker with these numbers if you feel like that's a bit high or a bit low. But regardless, there's a significant cost here to recruiting people who left because of potentially avoidable behaviour within your workplace. Christine, do you want to look at that through the cultural angle again?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Workplace Bullying Institute, just to kind of add to those figures, compiled data that a third of employees who faced a sustained bullying or harassment campaign chose to resign outright to protect their health rather than stick it out and wait for a resolution. So again, there's an obvious hidden cost, as Ash has mentioned, of the kind of people having to leave the organisation rather than stay and fight. But that comes also with a loss of institutional knowledge and experience. if those people leaving have been with the organisation a long time or have really key stakeholder relationships, have built trust with people, have overseen projects from inception, etc., that's a massive loss to the organisation and to the people that are left behind. And also, it doesn't address the kind of core issue of the individuals conducting the harmful behaviour in the first place, and potentially that those individuals or that situation is less likely to be addressed if the victims leave, particularly if there's no reports that have actually been made, or if the organisation's only looking at formal reports, or not analysing other information that might be available if there's been exit interviews where things have been raised, etc. And people leaving are really it's obviously kind of the end of the road, and it's really about taking a preventative approach before that happens to avoid it, which a lot of what we've already discussed comes back into play. So building that speak up culture through having a variety of different reporting options, including anonymous routes, fostering psychological safety, encouraging people to speak up, showing being honest when you've made mistakes and having that learning culture. Because really the exit interview is too late.
And I think anyone in HR will tell you that there are three things in life that are unavoidable: death, taxes, and recruitment. And whilst we can't say that we will be preventing recruitment by having a good workplace culture, you might be able to reduce the amount of times you need to recruit within a year, which is obviously a drain on everyone's time. So next, we're going to talk about productivity loss. Now, productivity loss is an absolutely huge number. And this is the most hidden cost of them all, because you can track absenteeism rates. You can understand through exit interviews when people are leaving the business, but it's really hard to understand when you have someone showing presenteeism. For anyone that doesn't know what presenteeism is, that is when someone is still turning up to the office, but because of an issue that might be to do with workplace misconduct, it might be to do with something going on in their personal life, it might be that they are disillusioned with the direction of the business, but it means they're turning up to work and they're not bringing their full selves to work. And that leads to poor performance, it leads to targets not being hit, it leads to a massive loss of productivity within a business. And so again, this looks at if you have 1,000 employees within your business. We assumed the average earnings of just over £70,000. That is a wage bill of £1.2 million of people, of 15% of employees who have been affected by workplace misconduct. If those 15% of people see a productivity drop of just 1%, that is £120,000 a year of time where you're not getting full value out of your employees. Maybe that's even at 0.5%. That's about a day, a year. £60,000 is a lot of money to lose off the bottom line, lose from productivity because of misconduct or something potentially avoidable within your workforce and not managing it correctly. It's worth saying as well that when you tie sort of productivity loss and absenteeism and recruitment together, all those things, they estimate that sort of bringing in a new member of staff will cost around about 1 to 1.5 times their salary. So an average salary of 80k, you're talking 120k in loss of productivity, absenteeism, recruitment costs, ramping up, just for one person. So if this impacts one person within your business within a 12-month time, already outside of everything else, that is a significant cost that potentially could have been avoided. Christine?
Yeah, and I guess why does this happen? Pressure to perform, being worried about losing a job, etc., might make people come to work despite feeling unable to operate at full capacity. And potentially this is something that's even more prevalent in the financial sector. So again, the Treasury report that I mentioned at the start of the webinar found that presenteeism presenteeism in the financial sector is a barrier to progress, and that actually there's a kind of culture of having to be present in financial services, but that firms should really look at output rather than presence in offices in general. Because, you know, presenteeism can cause mistakes, performance issues. If you're forcing yourself to work when you're actually not well, then potentially in the long run it causes more illness or burnout. So it's really important to try to identify the signs of this. As Ash said, it's harder to spot than people not coming to work at all. But potentially somebody could be, for example, logging on and sending emails even when you know that they're not well or when they're supposed to be on sick leave. And I think showing responsible behaviour as management can help with this, making sure that taking time off to address illness is seen as like a professional responsibility and not kind of a luxury.
Thanks, Christine. The final thing we were going to talk about today was tribunals and settlements. Now, this we sort of said at the beginning is perhaps the more obvious cost of poor workplace misconduct. But it's worth sort of saying that the new Workers Protection Act says that when someone takes you to tribunal, if the Workers Protection Act is not complied with, there is going to be a 25% uplift penalty on any cost of tribunal. That's a significant change to the costs of the worst case scenario. And whilst not everything necessarily goes as far as a tribunal, the cost of settlement and claiming outside of a tribunal can also be high. So once we have the numbers here around the actual cost of potentially settling or potentially going to tribunal within a year, we sort of acknowledge that for 1,000 employees, you're probably only going to tribunal once every 5-6 years, something like that. There'll be more claims settled outside of tribunal, but all of these cases take time from senior leaders, legal fees, and add stress as well. And let's not underestimate the value of stress that could potentially be avoidable if you'd spotted these behaviours earlier and intervened before it got to this point. So, like I said, we wanted to talk about the hidden costs today, so I'm not going to delve too high into those numbers. Christine, was there anything worth just raising around about tribunals and settlements before we move on to the questions?
Yeah, so I guess just some kind of quick, less visible side effects of the slightly more visible cost here. So it's not just the individual directly involved in the claim that's affected. There could be team members that are asked to give evidence. There could be this kind of ripple effect in terms of the emotional impact, people feeling like they're having to take sides, a bit of a polarization between people in the office, potentially between staff, management, etc., which can have longer term ripple effects on organizational culture, productivity, morale, etc. And those can occur during proceedings, after proceedings, but current tribunal backlogs and wait times mean that the kind of average time to resolve a claim has actually risen from what was 23 weeks a year ago to now 36 weeks. So it's potentially quite a protracted time for these ripple effects to be taking shape. And cases might actually bring things to light which kind of expose issues with an organisation's processes. For example, if the tribunal finds that there's been a real lack of care during an investigation of a grievance, or somebody hasn't been treated well who spoke up about something, that might then affect the trust of those who remain in the organisation and kind of erode that confidence in speaking up about other issues. If the tribunal has found that the organisation needs to change things like processes or policies, implement training, that's obviously going to have a knock-on effect in terms of cost as well. And the last one, which is huge and hard to quantify, is reputational damage, especially if it's high profile or there's been media coverage. That will potentially impact on the business in terms of like clients being willing to work with you and more. So again, these are kind of more how to minimize these issues rather than general preventative advice, but some ideas could be, while the tribunal process is ongoing, there's undoubtedly going to be a bit of focus on that, but don't overlook those that remain in the organisation. Try and be transparent, although legal case details need to be protected, but kind of agree on some messaging to avoid like the rumour mill going wild, for example. Share lessons learned with the team, share what you've learned about what actions need to be taken, what improvements are going to be made, and try and kind of provide support in terms of those maybe giving evidence who might need emotional support, signposting to resources, but also in terms of psychological safety, make it a safe environment for people to kind of question things, to share ideas, to voice their feelings, and to kind of voice if there are tensions that are surfacing as a result of the ongoing proceedings.
And that reputational damage is a vicious cycle, right, Christine? Because if your business gets a poor reputation, that can mean things like it's harder to recruit. You spend longer recruiting because people catch wind that you're a bit of a you've got a bit of a toxic culture or an issue and people don't want to join you. Or it might mean that people are less willing to speak up in the future because you've got a reputation for not handling those situations well, and that leads to increased absenteeism and presenteeism and all those things. So, getting to the point of going to a tribunal and settlement can have a really long-lasting impact on the business, going back to all the hidden costs that we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely.
I think we've got time for a couple of questions. I don't know if there are any questions in the chat. I can't actually see them.
So far, none have come through in the chat, I don't think. I'll just check the Q&A.
If anyone does have any questions, now would be a great time to raise it. Equally, if you'd like us to send them to us afterwards, we're more than happy to talk through anything that might come up.
So one question just posted in the chat is, how is a reporting tool different from what we already have via our whistleblowing hotline? So I can maybe start off a quick response to this and then hand over to you, Ash. I think obviously every organisation is different in terms of what you already use, but we often hear from organisations thinking about working with us or that we end up working with, that existing measures they have, particularly whistleblowing hotlines, if it's kind of like a phone line or an online tool that's potentially kind of outsourced in the US or wherever, they're often not that well known about by employees. There's not always great kind of information sharing about when to use the tool and how and what kind of constitutes as something that can be reported, or they're feared potentially as this kind of last resort type reporting system. I think what we have been speaking about in this webinar, what we provide at Culture Shift, but also I think what legislation and regulation now requires is something different. It's something that enables people to speak up earlier, that's really well understood by employees. People can access it easily, and it allows them to report things anonymously or with their contact details, to raise concerns, but also to get support from an organisation. And I think that is potentially slightly different to some of the, I guess, more traditional whistleblowing type hotlines that exist.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying that if something gets to a whistleblowing situation, like generally that's too late to really do anything about it. Like chances are someone's going to leave your organization. Either the person who's raising the complaint might feel disillusioned with the outcome and probably gets their head turned, or if the incident is serious enough, you might find that you're losing the person who has instigated the poor behavior. Having a system that allows people, or gives people the confidence to speak up about lower level behaviors earlier in the process, might mean that there can be intervention or training to stop that from happening in the future. So I think that's actually brought us to time. So thank you, Christine, for what's been quite a really rich discussion. Just to sort of pull together key takeaways from today. A poor speak-up culture isn't just a compliance gap, it's a direct driver of absenteeism, recruitment costs, lost productivity. And as we've shown you today, these costs can mount up pretty quickly, and they can be quantified, not just estimated. On the regulatory side, the FCA's non-financial misconduct rules land on the 1st of September, and the Employment Right Act's All Reasonable Steps duty follows on the 1st of October. Together, they raise the bar quite significantly for financial services firms specifically. So if you haven't already started thinking about what all reasonable steps looks like in practice for your organisation, now is the time to get that house in order. An investment in speak up culture and case management infrastructure has a demonstrable return. It's not just risk mitigation, there's a genuine business case for doing this. So, a couple of things for you to take away. Firstly, if you want to try the ROI calculator yourself, it's live on our website. I believe we're going to send out a link for that. And it'll give you a real sense of the savings that report and support could deliver for your organization. And if you want to see how those numbers are built, the data sources and methodology are linked in there too. And you can also play around, input your actual figures and see what that really means for your organization. Secondly, if you'd like a more tailored look at your own numbers and how report and support can help you, we're more than happy to give you a demo of our system and talk you through how report and support can help mitigate against some of the numbers that the ROI calculator has spat out. Finally, if you've got any questions after today that we've not answered or anything else in your mind, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Christine directly. We'll put our details sort of in the chat and circulate them afterwards. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you found it useful and hopefully we'll speak with you again soon.